Let's get one thing straight. Gen Z is not lazy. They are actually just missing early reps. I was speaking with somebody just the other day, and they said the problem with Gen Z, they're lazy. They just don't want to work. And the data just doesn't support that. So we're going to cover today what leaders need to know and the unintended consequences of these missing reps. And for those of you that are parents, you probably find it interesting as well. When you look at the data, you actually are starting to see a massive shift in how and when people show up for their first jobs. We shared with the data point from last year that said 15% of Gen Z had a job before 15 or 16 years old. The rest of generations is about 36%. But the older you get, from millennials to Gen X to boomers, the more likely you were to have those jobs before you were 15 or 16 years old. But let's look at data from just a couple of weeks ago. That Gen Z number actually shrank to 12%. So that means even from a year ago, we have fewer Gen Z having those early reps of those kind of non-traditional first jobs. So what's happening is when they show up for their first real job, clearly they don't have some of the skills that maybe previous generations had when they showed up for their first real jobs. When I host my podcast and I interview CEOs from around different business verticals, I always ask them about their first job, which is really kind of the catalyst for this whole project. And what I find is that they always say things like babysitting, paper routes, mowing the lawn. So in January, I decided to put that question in the survey to actually see how the different generations panned out. So no big surprise. Today, Gen Z, they're not babysitting, they're not doing the paper routes, and they are not mowing lawns to the same degree as other generations did as their first jobs. But clearly they have to be doing something, right? And so some of the jobs that they do, Gen Z, that previous generations did not do, is things like pet sitting and walking dogs, and also tutoring, but then also sports officiating. So I thought it was pretty interesting to see how the types of jobs have shifted. But again, remember, a much smaller number of Gen Z are working versus previous generation. So this next data point I found super interesting. Gen Z is much more likely to have restaurant front of house as their first job versus other generations. And it's because Gen Z is missing those mowing the lawn, the babysitting, paper routes. So restaurants is the first place. And we might think that's intuitive, but here's the thing we're not talking enough about. The so what, now what is that when we think about training young people in a restaurant, we're training them about how the operations work, how to run food, how to prepare food. What we're not teaching them is the idea of accountability, the idea of communication, the idea of human connection. And so they're showing up to the first jobs without these basic skills due to the missing reps. So for leaders out there that actually take this to heart, not only are you going to have better employees when they're younger, we're going to have better prepared leaders in the future. Well, I hope you enjoyed this one, and please take this one to heart. Thank you.